There are few ways of getting my attention faster than advertising your work as a mix between ethereal beauty and guttural filth. Which brings us neatly to the 7th studio album from one-man band Unreqvited. But in a world where this kind of mixology of opposing forces is becoming increasingly common, does this veteran act have enough say in a market that's now reaching saturation point? Guys, gals, and non-binary pals, my name is Ian, this is Rhyme Signatures, and we are once again opening the lid on the best new releases in prog, rock, and metal. Unrequited is a name I've been exposed to an awful lot, and while I've been acutely aware of their existence, I've never actually found much time to, listen to them. I'd often see their name flashing up on my various regular online haunts, I'd see discussions of them on my social media, but for whatever stupid-ass reason, I'd never actually sat down and listened to them until now. And I'll be real with you, I've got some deep regrets for my past self. Turns out during my research for this review that Unrequited is exactly my kind of jam. Dark, depressive, haunting atmospheric black metal with just the right amount of shoegaze and textural soundscapes to keep things from feeling too overbearing and dank. But this is their 7th studio album, and usually at this point in any band or creative person's output, one would expect a degree of, how shall I put it, colouring inside the lines, of following their own rulebook that has brought them to being able to actually create a 7th studio album. And sure, the hallmarks of what has made Unrequited Unrequited are certainly here, but there's a huge cultural shift on this album that I feel has made a significant step up for the enigmatically named man in charge, Ghost. And it's an incredibly simple one. Gone are the vocalizations in favour of real lyricism and heartfelt poetry. You see, up until now, while Ghost has sung on previous albums, there were never any actual lyrics. Ghost's vocal cords were used to add texture and atmosphere, with his trademark yells and grunts forming the accenting to the music underneath it. But now, we have lyrics, we have clean vocals, and it adds a level of complexity and intrigue to his music that I feel has been missing from his previous albums. A controversial decision and evolution for his long-term fans? Maybe, but I'm a relative newcomer, and for me, this is the secret ingredient that's made this new album a flawed but demandingly essential listen. So if you're a fan of bands like Deafheaven, Alcest, Isan, An Autumn for Crippled Children, Wolves in the Throne Room, etc., honestly take your pick of whatever black metal-infused shoegazy music you want to mention, then this is going to be right up your street. It's worth bearing in mind, though, that the blackened elements here do most definitely feel like the sidekick to the atmospheric orchestrations that lead the charge. Beauty is the main character to the supporting beast on this album, and this may or may not be disappointing to you. My listens to Unrequited's earlier albums gave me a lot of context to this record, and when you consider this is their 7th studio album, to be this bold, this fearless in what they're doing is a big breath of fresh air for me. Consisting of 7 tracks across a 43-minute runtime, A Pathway to the Moon is an incredibly easy album to digest. It's a well-paced, albeit uneven experience, but it feels accessible and immediately engaging, making for a record that practically demands multiple listens in a row over a single sitting. The initial overture track of Disintegrate does an excellent job of setting the scene for the overall tone and atmosphere that you're about to experience. It's bold, it's fragile and innocent, but with a backbone of solid steel. And when we segue into the first real track of The Antimatter, the longest song on the album at 10.5 minutes, we have the curtain well and truly thrown back to be exposed to some of the catchiest, gnarliest, and most aggressive riffs and vocals I've heard this year so far. Ghost spits out his lyrics with a barely contained venom against a background of tremolo-picked guitars, rolling drums, and furious orchestrations, and it's all super dramatic and overblown, of course. But it's when things calm down a little bit after the first couple of minutes that we see the more atmospheric and beautiful side of the music take the wheel. Now, I've heard a lot of music of this ilk and style, but it never wears out its welcome for me, and this is handled particularly well. Ghost's clean vocals are absolutely gorgeous, giving us some thick melodies to ensnare our senses with, and I always walk away from The Antimatter humming these clean lines to myself as they have stuck firmly in my head. It's the follow-up songs, though, of The Starforger and Void Essence Frozen Tears that really cemented this album in my mind as being worthy of my attention. The former is definitely a Song of the Year contender for me, and absolutely where I'd be pointing you towards if you're looking to see if this album is something for you or not. There's a little bit of grime here and there, but by and large this song is all about creating something astonishingly beautiful. The guitars are crystal clear, the keyboards tasteful and well implemented, the vocal melodies are absolutely spine-chilling. Ghost is holding nothing back here. Raised in your embrace, a nurtured ember, into a blaze, a whispered wonder. Every time those soaring cleans cut across the dank of the black metal instrumentation underneath, I get completely lost in the experience. It's an unforgettable moment and feels like a turning point in my appreciation of the album. It's around about here I feel like I'm listening to something that is no longer asking for my attention, but demanding it. And that demand is well rewarded with the second centerpiece song on the album of Void Essence Frozen Tears. Big keys, big guitars, big vocals. It's a natural segue from the previous song, but feels like it's taking the lessons given to us by the album so far and bringing them to a laser-focused point. Every component element of the Pathway to the Moon feels like it has reached a crescendo here. It effortlessly snakes its way from filthy to gorgeous with a kind of fluidic grace that's not seen anywhere near enough in this kind of music. This is the kind of atmospheric black gaze that reminds me of precisely why I love this kind of music so much. But of course, nothing is perfect, and while A Pathway to the Moon sprints off the starting blocks with an Olympic level of athleticism, I do feel that the album loses its way a little bit with the last 3 tracks. Now, I'm not saying that the last 15 minutes or so of the record are bad, absolutely not. Into the Starlit Beyond, Celestial Sleep, and Departure Everlasting Dream are all strong tracks when taken together, but it just feels like Unrequited are putting the brakes on a little bit too hard and a little bit too early here. For lack of a better description, this final trio of songs does feel like an extended and elaborate outro, losing the bite and aggression that's ever so present in the salvo of the Antimatter, the Starforger, and Void Essence Frozen Tears. Now, there are still a few moments of the harder edge to be found on Into the Starlit Beyond, which keeps this the more interesting of the final tracks. But what we have here is an album that honestly shifts too hard and too soon into the softer and more introspective atmospheric beauty, when the album has largely focused on maintaining a healthy balance between the two elements up until this point. On a record that's only 43 minutes long, to have almost a third of it feel like an outro is a wee bit much for my liking, and just gives the impression of a record that's spending far too long just saying goodbye. If we could have had a little bit more aggression, a little bit more bite on Into the Starlit Beyond, axed Celestial Sleep entirely, or integrated parts of it into Departure the Everlasting Dream, then I think the latter part of the record would have landed a lot harder for me. Also, I'm not hugely fond of the drums and their mixing into the album. They feel at times a little bit too high in the mix, standing out a bit too hard, making them feel distracting to the rest of the music. It's a minor complaint, sure, as the actual compositions and fills are genuinely fantastic. It's just they would carry themselves a bit better if they were pushed back a little bit rather than sitting on top of the music most of the time. End of the day, though, this is still a very strong album. The opening salvo is an easy 9 out of 10 for me, but A Pathway to the Moon's insistence on dropping its bite way too soon does make for a latter part of the album that lets down the early excellence. So, what else can I possibly say about Unrequited's A Pathway to the Moon? This album has been a sincere lesson to me to realise that if everyone you know is talking about a band for years and years, then don't ignore them and get on board, because dang it, I feel like I've been seriously missing out by passing them by for so long now. You can probably guess I don't feel this is a perfect album, not at all, but it is certainly one that I've had an enormous amount of enjoyment listening to every time I push play. It's got a serious heft to its blackened parts, and the joy felt through the lighter moments cannot be understated. Now, the concept of Beauty and the Beast is not anything new to the genre, no, but when it's done well, it's one of my favourite musical tropes. And despite perhaps a bit of an imbalance towards the end of the album, which does admittedly throw the pacing off a bit, this remains an excellent pick for anyone who's been craving a little bit of that juicy black gaze goodness in 2025. Recommendation here is to pick up a digital copy of this one. I've been having a lot of fun listening to A Pathway to the Moon, and I can see it forming part of my regular rotation this year, especially with tracks as strong as The Star Forger and Void Essence Frozen Tears forming the bulk of the listening experience. Definitely check this one out if you're usually put off by the harsher and more angular side of the metal spectrum, as the chances are the heavy leaning on the more lush and atmospherics towards the end might actually be what seals the deal for you. This is all, of course, guys, just my opinion, so if you loved this one or if you hated this one, please talk to me about your experience of the album in the comments down below. Please do drop me a thumbs up if you liked the video, please do tell your friends about little old me, and please do consider throwing the channel a subscription if you've been enjoying my content so far. But until next time, guys, as always, keep your rhyme signatures pretty odd.